So throughout my 30 plus years of practicing neurology, what has really interested me was to find that a significant number of patients, besides presenting with their neurological problem, also have a roster of emotional or psychological problems as well. You see in the chart. And these problems including anxiety, depression, social phobias, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and all of these people sought psychiatric intervention and took medication, but on a long-term basis, it was obvious that just very few of them had a successful outcome. Now, when I went to medical school, which was many years ago, we learned conventional psychiatry and conventional psychopharmacology, and that was the way to treat patients who had emotional disorders or mood disorders. And it disturbed me a great deal to see that a very few percentage of these patients I was treating were not helped psychiatrically. So what I did, I felt very badly about that because we were taught that this was just the way to go. So I began researching other forms of psychotherapy and therapists to whom I could refer these patients. And of all the therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy made the most sense to me. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But first, let me explain to you on a neurophysiological basis what happens to the brain when the mood is depressed or fearful. And please refer to your schematic over here. It's not scary. I'm not going to make you fearful or scared. I'm going to show you how easy it's going to be to learn what we're going to talk about. Now, if you look at the brain, this is a lateral aspect of the brain, and I want you to focus on the dark semicircular circuit that you'll see from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. Everybody see that? Okay? You see the circuit, and you have arrows. One arrow is pointing to the amygdala. The other arrow is pointing to the prefrontal cortex. And there's a circuit that goes back and forth and back and forth. And to those of you who learned about physiology or anatomy, you'll understand that these organs, including the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex, comprise what's called the limbic system, or the seat of emotions. It's called the seat of emotions because when one is fearful or depressed, a large amount of cortisol is produced in the by the limbic system. Cortisol is a hormone. When it's elevated, it causes dysfunction of the neurons or nerve cells in this limbic system. Now, this in turn leads to problems with memory and decision-making, regulating emotions, and social behavior. Because as you can see, the prefrontal cortex is responsible and regulates cognition and reason, whereas the amygdala regulates mood, memory, conditions of fear, and threat. Everybody has that? I'll make sure everybody understands it. I know the first time around I did. Okay, but I want to make sure that all of you do. If you don't, please ask me. Okay. So science has known that the amygdala has an inversely reciprocal relationship with the prefrontal cortex. When the activity of one is elevated, the activity of the other is decreased. When the activity of one is lowered, the activity of the other is increased. So, when there is fear, under circumstances of fear, when the amygdala activity is heightened, because that's where the fear and threat center is located, this leads to shut down the ability of the prefrontal cortex to exert reason over emotion. And what happens is that you get a cascade of fearful responses that include increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and really freezing. So freezing in place actually ensues by many scientific studies. Now, when the prefrontal cortex is able to reassert its capacity to regulate logic and reason, it in turn inhibits the amygdala, thereby reducing and extinguishing fear. And you can see in the upper right-hand column what happens in depressed states, or fearful states, or anxious states. We have an increased amygdala, leading to decreased activity in the PFC, or the prefrontal cortex. And underneath, I want you to look at that. And this is how cognitive behavioral therapy works. It strengthens the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala pathway. So as you can see, the PFC, heightened PFC, leads to lower amygdala activity, which means heightened logic and reason leads to extinguishing of fear and threat. Okay?
A question.
Yes?
Is this something you could see on a functional MRI?
Yes. Yes. And when you have an increased activity of the prefrontal cortex to amygdala pathway, this increases the logic and reason center, decreasing the fear and threat center of the amygdala. Now there's mounting evidence that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can make very real structural changes to the brain. Now by changing our thinking and therefore behavior using CBT, we are making positive long-term changes, hard-coded changes to our brains. CBT has been subject to many numerous and clinical trials, and in many cases it has been shown to be even more effective than medication. And we can monitor these changes, again, using functional MRI. You know, there's negative thinking, which is called the nocebo effect. And the same power that negative thinking can destroy you, positive thinking can heal you. Perception, positive thinking can heal you. So if we grow up and are programmed with a strong belief system, we will be more powerful than we are now. So, in other words, it's something that we can change about ourselves. It's not something that we can say, well, this is the way we're born, this is the way we're programmed, this is the way our genes are just laid out. We can change our gene coding by cognitive behavioral therapy. And Miriam will talk to you more about that in a minute. Now, if we're programmed with a stronger belief system, then we can, again, be more powerful than we ever have been. And that's where cognitive behavioral Torah therapy comes into play. Applying CBT through the lenses of Torah and Tanya. And this is where Miriam Yerushalmi comes into play, because she has applied CBT through the lenses of Torah and Tanya for many years, and she has been very successful with hundreds and hundreds of patients. But she's going to talk more about that a little bit later. In the third aliyah of Shemot, the Torah relates that Moshe, who was a prince in Egypt, as you know, for 20 years, we just learned that. went out to see the suffering of his brethren. He went out of the palace and he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jewish slave. Now, he felt very, very close to his own brethren and proceeded to kill this Egyptian taskmaster and bury him under the sand. Next day, he goes out and he sees two Jews quarreling and arguing with each other. And they try to break it up. And one Jew says to him, "The matter will be known. The matter will be known that you killed that Egyptian taskmaster." Well, Moshe got very, very fearful. Very, very fearful. And the Torah describes Moses' emotion. He became frightened and said, "Indeed, the matter has become known." The Torah relates that when Moshe discovered that people knew he had killed an Egyptian, he became fearful for his future. With this episode, the Torah hints at the extraordinary power of bitachon, a complete trust in Hashem. And that to have bitachon not only means to have faith that whatever Hashem does is for the good, but to know, to really know, that God will grant you goodness in the revealed way. To internalize that faith to such a degree that you know. To paraphrase the Tzemach Tzedak's famous advice, if you think positively, the future will be positive. The Torah alludes to this principle of bitachon by telling us about Moshe's worries, which preceded actually the threat to his life. Considering the Torah's usual total conciseness, the fact that the Torah even makes special note of Moshe's uneasiness before Pharaoh sought to have him executed suggests that Moshe's fear actually contributed to the outcome that followed. Had Moshe not been frightened and had complete bitachon in Hashem, perhaps the threat to his life would never have come about. In a letter, which I'm not going to go into detail about from the Rebbe, and which I will leave you with, highlights the novelty of the teaching. Think good and it will be good. Think good and it will be good. The phrase coined by the Tzemach Tzedak, which teaches that the process of actualization, something becoming real, does not begin from verbalizing an idea, where a spiritual idea and energy becomes manifest in physical reality, but begins much, much earlier, on a more spiritual plane through the process of thought. That thought begins the process of something becoming so. So that a positive thought will lead to a positive outcome, and a negative thought most likely will lead to a negative outcome. And this process of applying CBT through our teachings of Torah is what made Rebbe Yerushalmi a pioneer in this field. Through her authorship of many self-help books, located here, entitled Reaching New Heights in Marriage, Mikvah, Prayer and Meditation, and Happiness, as well as her video classes, which are shared all over the world on Torah Anytime, Facebook, Torah Cafe, and on her own channel. She has helped and successfully counseled so many hundreds of patients. Over several decades, my dear friend Miriam has also become my mentor and has helped me on my journey to lead a happier, more spiritual endowed life. I owe her so much. To my forever friend, mentor, soul-sister, and speaking for all your clients, followers, and listeners, I say Modi Mana Imla, Miriam. And this time I'd like to ask Miriam Yerushalmi to please privilege us by saying a few words. Thank you.
So before I speak, we have someone from actually from New York that was very excited about what we're doing here today, and he actually read my prayer book and then started reaching out to me saying, I would really love to have this in Hebrew. Can I volunteer to translate it to Hebrew?
Wow.
And so I just would like to give him a couple of moments here to share what his experience with Torah and science before I start giving my speech. Oh, his name is Shneur Zalman. Pebble.
Thank you very much. So apropos, we're Motzei Shabbos. It's a time of Milan Malka. And I know everyone has come for esteemed speakers, which I'm not yet, and I will become, hopefully. But I would like to share a story, as in the spirit of Motzei Shabbos, that it says, there's a famous saying that says, there's a slua, special omen, and on Motzei Shabbos, if you say a story of the Baal Shem Tov, it's going to bring you parnasa. It's going to bring you good income and good wealth and good parnasa. So the Hasidic saying explains that. It says there's three lav dafkas, three not necessarily a story of the Baal Shem Tov, but a story of any tzaddik. Not necessarily a story on Motzei Shabbos, but anytime it's good to say a story about a tzaddik. And not only is it an omen for parnasa, but it's a school for anything. So whenever we say a story of a tzaddik, we're opening up to the life of the tzaddik. And interestingly enough, we actually started off over here because we have some out-of-towners, and we actually started off with early comers, and we were discussing a story of a great tzaddik who was mentioned, and I can say the story of well-known Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasav, known as the Sasaver. So there are many stories of him. One of them we mentioned, which has to do with Ahavas Yisrael, how he went. There's actually a song about this. He went on the way to shul before Yom Kippur, and the whole crowd is waiting for the tzaddik to come and daven with them, and he doesn't show up. And where did he get stuck? On his way, there was a cry of a child, and he heard the cry, and he decided he went into the house, and apparently the mother wanted to catch a quick prayer, just for a few minutes. She figured she'll be holy on the day of Yom Kippur, and hopefully her child will survive. And so Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasav comes in, he finds a crying baby, and he immediately tends to the baby and begins to sing to it, calms the baby till the baby fell asleep. And once the baby was sleeping and he knew everything was safe, only then did he go to shul. And I think the lesson is self-explanatory. So I just want to share one more thing, and I think that's all I have to say for tonight. But talking about, Dr. Lerman has mentioned before the concept of bitachon. Bitachon meaning, as the story that was brought up about the Tzemach Tzedek, that Chassid once came to, and he said, I have problems. I have different things that are making my life very harsh, and I don't know what's going to be. So Tzedek told him, "Tracht gut, wird sein gut. Think good, and it will be good." What does that mean? Think good, and it will be good. If I think good, it's going to be good. Apparently, yes. So, sounds very holy, and I'd like to make it a little more practical by reading a personal story. So if it's not only stories of the Baal Shem Tov, maybe it's not only stories of tzaddikim, but any story that happened with Hashgacha Pratis, with Hashem running the world. So I have a personal story I want to share, and we were speaking about the translation from English to Hebrew. So yes, I was in Israel for quite a while, and one of my interesting experiences in Israel, I had many interesting experiences in Israel, as anyone who goes to Israel knows you get interesting experiences in Israel. That's somewhere people go for opening up to higher levels of connection to Hashem. So I was in a certain city, we'll say it was Rishon LeZion, and I had to get to my home, which was town down the highway. And not everything is so developed in that area with public transportation and so on. And so I'm waiting for what they call in Israel a temp. Temp, for those who know, which means a hitchhike, which is a very common thing in Israel. And you wait, and usually people, fellow Jew will stop off. I don't advise anyone to do this because you have to be very, very careful, especially in the security situation today in Israel. But I'm just saying something that was done, don't do this at home. So I needed to get to the highway where hopefully I will get some sort of transportation to my hometown. But to get to the highway is quite a distance, and there's no public transportation to there. So I wait for a tram, and hopefully a car is going to volunteer to take me to the highway on his way. And I'm waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. No one stops. And you would think, well, this is not the rule of hitchhiking. People are supposed to stop. And so I think to myself, am I really trusting that Hashem is going to help my way? Or I'm just relying on statistics that out of 1,000 cars, so one of them is going to stop and give me a ride. And at that moment, I make a decision in my mind that I'm relying only on Hashem. He is definitely going to help me get to where I need to get. And so not more than 30 seconds pass by, and an Israeli taxi cab pulls over. And as you know, taxi cabs are not a free ride. And I wasn't up to paying for a ride at that moment, and so I gently motioned to him that I'm not up for a taxi ride. But he, being the Israeli that he was, motions to me in the window, "Come here." And he rolls down the window, and I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Tavo, come in." Okay, so I understand that he's not asking for money. But I come in, and I'm like, okay. Whatever. He's like, where do you need to go? I told him I need to get to catch some bus to this and this place. Okay. You know the story? He starts asking me in Hebrew. Tamakir tasipur, like Israelis like to dramatize things, and he says. So there's a story of someone who is in a city that is about to be plagued by a hurricane. And everyone says, evacuate, and this one person says, I'm relying on God. Okay? And then the police come and they say, we're here to save you, there's a hurricane coming, I'm relying on God. God's going to save me. And so the police evacuate, the rain starts coming, and to the extent that he had to go up to the second floor. Why? Because the first floor was already flooded. So now there's no way out of the city But a Coast Guard boat makes its way through the alleys of the city and pulls over right in front of his door, calls out, knocks out, and calls to him, "Hey, we're here to save you. God's going to save me." Okay? They try to convince him there's no one to talk to. They go, the rain is going, he has to get up to the roof. He's on the roof. What's he going to do? God's going to save me. And so a helicopter comes. We're here to save you. I don't go to helicopters. God's going to save me. And as the story goes, this Israeli driver of the taxi, who's, by the way, he wasn't wearing a yarmulke. I don't know if he put on tefillin that day, or I don't know anything. I just know he's a Jewish person that's driving me. And he tells me, you know what happened? He says, the guy drowned. And he comes up to heaven, and he says to heaven, how can this be? I was relying that God's going to save me. Why didn't God save me? And a heavenly voice calls out to him. God sent you the police you didn't want. God sent you a Coast Guard ride you didn't want. God sent you a helicopter. God was going to save you. Why did you refuse? And he turns to me and he says, God sent you a taxi. And that was my free ride.
Okay, thank you.
So, a story from Motzei Shabbos is a story about B'tachon, is a story about how when you do put your trust in Hashem, things happen. How? Hashem knows how. It's our job not to make too many calculations, but to let Hashem do the calculations for us.
Amen.
So, l'chaim.
By the way, he also translated the Hebrew book of Feifel the Falafel. And it actually was better than the original, I have to say. Wow, I'm so happy that people are here and joining. And this is like something for, I don't know, 40 years and more since I've been wanting to really do this. As a young child, I constantly was in so much pain seeing people suffering. And I knew I had to do something to change the world for the better. And I felt like I wanted to be a doctor, but I couldn't because I kept fainting when I would see blood. So good that you don't, and that you're doing what you're doing. And so I was like thinking, like, what can I do to help people? And one day I actually happened to be walking down the road, and I happened to see a seeing eye dog. And I had 2 dogs growing up, and I know how wild they are. And I'm thinking, this brain of a dog has been trained to go against its instincts and can really keep this man safe. And all of a sudden I'm seeing a cat cross the street with the dog almost, like, and I was at a distance, I'm like, I'm fearing for the life of this blind man. But the dog didn't go after the cat and cross the street. And then I said, I think this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to learn more about the brain, and I'm going to find out how we all can train our brain to be the best that we can be. Because I would see so much suffering, people fighting, people arguing, people depressed, people like, checking out almost. And like seeing, even in my master's degree of psychology and master's degree of marriage and family counseling, seeing that people on medications weren't really being fully helped. They would come to me and say, it just takes the edge a little off, but I can't sleep, and my mind is all over the place, and I'm a mess, and I can't be a mother, I definitely can't be a wife, and the list would go on. And it was kind of jolting to me when I would see this again and again and again. So as the more I got into this brain training, I noticed that the people that were coming to me, whether it was traditional therapy, or whether it was even some of the more high-tech CBT, EMDR, and all these other different kinds of techniques which do have amazing results in many different ways, but I felt that some of them, and if not all of them, were missing some of the package of their healing. And I put this little pamphlet together mentioning the different factors that if you're not looking into, then it ends up being like an incomplete healing. Because one person can come in, and I can give you, throughout this lecture, what we're going to do is definitely talk about some of the cases that have come my way. If one of those component factors are not looked into and diagnosed, then it's an incomplete healing. So the first one, which I'd like to start with, is the brain factor. And I decided to call this type of holistic training of the brain and counseling CBTT, because one of the factors is also the spiritual factor, which really is a big factor, which so many times God is not in the therapy room. And it's a no-no. Like if you talk about spiritual aspects, and they'll say to you, why, I didn't come here for a Rebbitzin to teach me anything. I'm here for like psychology or to speak to a therapist. But again, as we're going to go through this today, this is one of the main key factors that we're going to try to start putting God back in. So I want to help doctors. I want to help social workers. I want to help all those in the healing practice, including therapists, to really incorporate more than just CBTT. And here we go today. So we're going to start with the brain factor, and what I have termed up mushy mind syndrome. We know that the brain maximizes its potential around 25, 26. You might find that out when you go to get insurance, because if you're under 25, you're at risk and you have a higher insurance rate, or you can't actually rent a car in some places. So, but after a peak point, it starts to decline if not used properly. And so the brain, which we all know is the muscle, if not used, will become mushy like any muscle. So sometimes it's a matter of a person so emotional because their brain is not functioning at its optimal level. And there was a research by Dr. Sarah Lazar who actually took pictures of people who would do brain training kinds of things, whether it was learning new languages or learning, instruments or praying, meditating, whatever it was. In the brain scans, it would show that the cortex lining was thickening as the people were aging. And normally, that actually is the opposite. Normally, after 26, the potential of the brain starts to decline if not otherwise being used in these types of ways. So, especially in today's day and age, so many people, even back in the days when there was just the TV on all day long, but now we have the TV on all day long in our pockets, not just when we got home. So, and recent research does show that by overuse of these technological gadgets called iPhones and all these other things, that our brain capacity becomes less and less, and people are complaining that they can't concentrate, they keep forgetting things, and this is a result of overuse of these gadgets. So what we have to understand is, if we only have a half-baked understanding of a problem, then we're only going to have a half-baked solution. So one of the problems could be they're not using their mind. How many people are so into being fit, exercising to keep their bodies fit and trim, at the expense, actually, of keeping their brains fit and trim? So instead of maybe some of the, so common, 2-3 hours in the gym and they feel so great, and yes, happy chemicals are being developed, but how much of that at the expense of really using our minds? So we have to examine all these components, and we have to go back to the brain gym. What happens when we do this type of work? And the type of work is deep learning, deep meditation, visualization, and even things like crossword puzzles and things like that. But what happens is the brain has what we said called neuroplasticity, and it literally, physically becomes stronger. There becomes more neural pathways between the brain and the heart. And then there's like empty spaces between the grooves of the brain that becomes less and less. because as it's getting stronger, it has the potential now to rule over emotions. Because there's a concept that is called thoughts that create emotions, right? So when you have certain thoughts, it will create an emotion. And when that happens, then there are neural pathways being created. More and more of thinking a certain way and practicing, let's say, positive affirmations or certain visualizations, you can literally outwit your brain and make the physiological aspect of your brain change so you have more neural pathways. And so then there's more telecommunication between the brain and the heart. The Frierdiker Rebbe actually writes in his memoirs that he actually met with a doctor, and the doctor said, "What are you doing with your life? You know, let's investigate." So he says, "Well, I study Hasidus." Well, what is Hasidus? Well, it's training the heart to listen to the brain. So the doctor said, "No wonder you're sick. You're trying to accomplish something so impossible. It's like two vast islands with the ocean so far between them." So the Frierdiker Rebbe writes his story about his father that met this doctor. And he said, no, you don't understand. The brain has the capacity to create a wiring system between the heart and the mind so that the heart will listen to the brain. By default, if you look at science, naturally, organically, we are born with the limbic part of our brain, the emotional part of our brain that works 3 to 4 times faster than our rational part of our mind. So that's why if you really see babies that they're underdeveloped brains, they're all crying. And that's my chair. And they make a big deal. They're so emotional. Well, as we get to that adult stage and people see that all of a sudden they're saying, "Oh, I'm getting angrier over the years. I used to not be as fearful. All of a sudden I'm getting panic attacks." So because over time, a mushy mind syndrome makes the mind not so strong and the emotions take over. So we have the power to create this wiring system. And as the brain becomes stronger, then it has the power, as we all know, moach shalet al halev.
So I had a question. So when doctors give psychiatric medicine to change the thinking pattern, does that show that thinking has to do with medication?
So let me tell you, I am not against medication. In certain cases, I am so pro it because the person is so not capable of functioning that the medicine does help them regulate their mind so that they can think a little bit, so that they can actually then do the work that will help them in the future. But the research does show, and I did a lot of research because I do programs for Nefesh International, training therapists, and I'm looking at all the research, and the research shows that medicine without psychotherapy just doesn't work so well. That to increase the power of the medicine, you really need, in conjunction, the therapy, just like you were saying.
Also, I might add that the medication mainly is to serve to elevate the circulation of certain neurotransmitters, such as norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin.
Yes.
And these are happy chemicals. But training the mind is really through what Miriam's saying, that these are pharmacological agents that increase the activity of these neurotransmitters.
But does it give you positive thinking, or that's?
It helps.
Oh.
It helps. I mean,
It does
if you are a little happier, you're able to think better.
But when
That way.
yeah, when people come to me and I say, "Look, if it's a severe case, I only highly recommend it when it's a severe case, because guess what? We can make happy chemicals ourselves in many different ways, which we will see here. So I first say the best thing is you train your brain to make the chemicals on its own so that you will be not dependent, because the body can get very dependent and used to these meds, and then you need higher and higher doses, and then higher and higher doses to get the same effect, and then eventually those medicines don't work, then you have to go and switch to another medicine, and there's always side effects and different aspects that ends up being in such a situation that there's many different people that I actually treated that they even went to ECT and it didn't even barely help them, and actually made things worse, which that's where a person can get shock treatment and end up just with a lot of loss of memory, a lot of side effects and has been prevented with many of the people that I've seen through this type of practice. So what happens is our mind can be very, very cluttered with a lot of old tapes. Something happened to you when you were a child, and another thing kept happening to you even as a teenager, and like these patterns of thoughts are there. But what's the incredible thing about our brain is that we can rewire circuits. If you had a trauma and the circuits of your brain frazzle, just like if you become weak because you sat on the couch eating potato chips all day long, and a week later you decide to get out of bed, or 2 weeks, your muscles in your body will not work, and it'll be hard for you to walk. So in our brain, we have the power to rebuild circuits, rebuild neural pathways, and it all takes just a little effort.
So this is without medication?
Without medication. I've been doing this for 30 plus years. And even before that, I was working in hospitals. We were using psychodrama, guided imagery, and self-hypnosis, and all kinds of things to help the person train their own brain. So let's see what is our gift. Our gift in our life is our brain, right? That's what makes us human. And our gift of our brain has what's called the faculty of imagination. And research shows if you're not actively using this faculty of your imagination in a positive way, programming positivity, the natural course of the brain is as follows. I don't want that information. Leave me alone. I'm stressed. I'm overworked. I don't want that information. Leave. So we're always on overload. We're always stressed. And our brain doesn't want to. It'll go on cruise control. But if we relax our body and we take deep breath and we bring oxygen to our brain and we spend even just 1 minute of a visualization of us being in a happy mood or an old memory that made us happy, then the brain says, I'm calm now. Now I can think that the old ways are not working for me. And you can outwit your brain. Research shows that the brain does not know the difference between past, present, and future. So if you're future seeking some great vision, or your past happy moment that you had at a party or some event, then the brain says, oh, you're happy. And happy chemicals begin to start. There's a doctor, Dr. Melrose. She wrote the book 60 Second Fix. And she writes that in 60 seconds, as the body is beginning to get calm, the brain organically wants to fix itself. But again, if we don't spend the time using our brain in this way, it's like a 2-year-old having a tantrum that doesn't want to do new things. It gets stressed out. It's so overwhelmed with life that it only is 60 seconds of calmly breathing, taking a moment, using your brain in a very calm way that now allows the brain to fix itself. And this is what the Rebbe Rashab actually said. One of the Chabad Hasidic Rebbe said that in just 1 minute of a meditation, that you can access the power of your brain to start changing your day and changing your normal way of being. That it can make you happier, it can actually prevent you from all kinds of negative mindsets. So, is this a 1, 2, 3 fix? Yes or no? Because we just saw 60 seconds. But it's again and again. Just like if you're going to practice to be a violinist. Will you become a violinist in a second? But eventually it's first, and then eventually, wow, it just happens on its own. So our brain is the same way. We practice positivity. We envision what our goal is to be, whether it's more calm with our children, or whether it's less annoying to our husbands and naggy. Whatever it is, that goal that you've been trying to attain, if you practice it in your head over and over again, not only do you create all these neural pathways, but you're what's called neural pruning. And what is neural pruning? Just like a garden, right? That there's so many weeds, but if you plant seeds and cultivate the ground, all of a sudden, there's just no weeds left. Because you flooded this territory with such blossoms. So our brain has the same capacity. When we're flooding our system with more and more positivity, then the negative gets pruned out. And not only pruned out, become obsolete. Literally, bye-bye. And it's interesting, in the Parsha, when Yosef was thrown in the pit, and it says, and there was no mayim, it says, the deeper teaching is that the pit is our brain. And if we're not flooding our brain with the waters of Torah, then what's going to be in this pit? Scorpion and snake-like thoughts. And that's what science is teaching us. If you're not programming your brain toward positivity, the natural way of the brain is to go back and again and again and again and again negative. Well, he said that, and she said that, and my mother thought I was not this, and my father thought I was, it just naturally just goes on the old, because it has nowhere else to go. And it wants to be kept busy in this very strange way. So, is it a 1, 2, 3? Yes and no. Yes, because in a matter of a very short period of time, I'm telling you, sometimes 2 to 3 days of doing this, people say, wow, I'm shifting. I feel better. Wow, and then it gives them hope, and then a month later, no one can believe the differences. So part of the key ingredient is also to be at peace with the process. Because there's what's called the first problem, like a person is depressed. And then there's the secondary problem. They're depressed that they're depressed. Or they're anxious, and they're so anxious that they're anxious. And so it becomes like a negative feeding cycle, and they get more entrapped. So if we can normalize their process and tell them that it's a process, and by understanding that with time that you will be able to help yourself, heal your brain, that calms a lot of people down. Because a lot of people think, oh my gosh, I'm not normal, I'm losing it, what is it going to be? And all these other thoughts feed on the other thoughts, and there's no room for any salvation.
And that could happen in 2 days? You could do that?
Yes, I've had clients where even the parents would call me and say, what did you do? And I also help by visualizing them have the success. Because we can and have the power to help other people. There was a research where they took 2 petri dishes, one very far away, and a group was asked to meditate that these cells were multiplying. The other group, petri dish, also far away, and they were asked to meditate that these were not multiplying. Guess what happened? The group that were having the vision and thoughts that those cells were multiplied, and the other ones did not. They did many research with rats, the list goes on. And how about us with Hasidus? Trach good design, right? We just said that. So when we actually think good of our children, we think the way we want our husband to be, we think the way we want to be, then that literally helps the whole world. So we have to know that, yeah.
Just because like psychologists usually say it takes 6 months to see changes, if they
Well,
want to make
let
little
me
changes.
tell-
So,
yes,
like,
it's true.
which one is it?
And 30 years ago, before Hasidus, and
Right.
even 10 years ago with Hasidus, I'm noticing a lot of incredible, amazing, like like transformation in a shorter period of time. The Rebbe actually said, just like technology is like Speedy Gonzales, everything is like progressing so intensely, so too in the spiritual. That what used to take us 120 years, Alvai, and fix the Midah, now in this generation, with the deep secrets of the Torah, and with all the science, technology of showing us the way as well, the two are merging in such an amazing way that we're seeing results in the most incredible way in a short period of time. Read 60 Seconds book. She says it also. That in such a short
And it
period
has
of time.
sustainable
Yes.
change?
Yes. Look, if you tell me, and I went to a dietitian, and they told me this, and this, and they did this, and this, but then after a week or two, they started doing the old habits. So it's not going to be sustainable. Just like you could say, oh my gosh, I was so starving, I was so hungry, and I got cured because I ate. Well, you have to continue to eat to continue to sustain that ability to not.
So it's not like 2 days and then you're healed.
No, it's continuous. Just like, when, as I said, you have to continuously use your brain so it doesn't get mushy. As soon as you let go, as soon as it's not filled up, then it becomes back to the old ways. So I want to continue here. And it says here that another very amazing technique is called pairing. So for instance, people have bad habits and they can't seem to break them. So one way is to pair your brain with a particular negative image so that your brain will pair the negative image with that kind of behavior. So for instance, smoking, let's say. You're trying to kick the habit of smoking. So all of a sudden you pair yourself in the image of being near a cigarette, but then you see whatever negative image I want to say. So your brain gets like jolted. Ich, I don't want this. This is disgusting. And again, your brain will be trained to be disgusted and revolted and not as much prone to that kind of behavior. I happen to do it. I happen to do it with a lot of people who are trying to lose weight, and I have meditations and things like that on YouTube and things like that where I'm pairing the brain with the negative. Then there's the pairing of the brain with positive. So you see yourself not smoking, without a headache, you see your skin vibrant, you see yourself with a lot of calmness, even without the cigarette, whatever it is, whether it's dieting because your doctor said your cholesterol, whatever it is, whether it's anger. So you pair your brain with something negative, and the brain gets in the habit to get repulsed, and then you pair your brain with the positive. So there are, what's called cognitive dissonance. There's so much conflict within us, and we're constantly trying to escape the feeling of ickiness, sadness, all these negative things. And so what we typically do is we find avenues to busy ourselves with to escape from that feeling of negative. So some people will turn to emotional eating. He just yelled at me. I feel terrible. It reminds me when my dad yelled at me. And then I feel even more terrible. And then I'm trying to get to something so it'll distract me so I don't have to feel the pain. And it's interesting, Tanya teaches us that. The Yetzer Hara wants us to engage in all these kinds of escapism, because then we just gave power over to the Yetzer Hara. We just empowered it when we give in to that indulgence or that escapism. Now, there's a lot of different other kinds of modalities out there that we were talking, that, I've mentioned here a few, more than a few. And all of these are amazing. But again, if they're not giving the person the full spectrum of what may be causing this problem, then it's like a half-baked solution. Yes, it does help a little bit. And yes, you'll have to go back again to get that help. But when you train your own brain to relax, then you don't have to keep going to something to relax you. You can keep going, it's healthy. It's very healthy. Get massage, get all these different acupunctures, get all these different things that are out there. And it's healthy for you to do it, to help calm your brain. But to have the real solution is you yourself using your brain and really strengthening those muscles in there. Because you know what, Dr. Sarah Lazar actually even researched these same groups of people for 30 years. Not only, as we said, did it create less and less, emotional problems, depression and anxiety, but and not only did it show on the pictures of these brains that they were getting thicker, but she saw that it was preventative for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementias. Everyone we know, at least 1 in 5 sometimes we're hearing this one and that one and this one. So whatever we're doing today is not only good for today, but also good for the future. So there's one type of modality that's called TMS, where it talks about, let's say someone is having anxiety and their heart is, having palpitations. So, and the person thinks they're literally having a heart attack, God forbid. So, let's say a TMS practitioner will help the brain realize that you're trying to escape the real problem. There is a problem that you're escaping, and so this is taking you away. Your mind is too stressed out from the real problem. It's creating a second problem so you don't have to deal with the first problem. So for instance, one boy came to me and he had ear problems, went everywhere, doctors and this and that. Everyone said there's nothing there, it's psychological. So came my way and I said, so I used the TMS approach. Because I felt, since it's a physical thing and I need to check this out. Could be diet, maybe he was allergic to some. It could be even when people have tooth problems, you can have ear problems. So I would maybe suggest them to go to a dentist and see maybe there's a bacteria. And there's many cases where mental disorders are coming from, bacteria in the mouth. So I started with this, was literally a 10-minute conversation. I said, is there a real stressor in your life? Like, is something going on? What's stressing you out? Oh, yes, everyone's telling me this yeshiva to go to and that yeshiva to go to. I have so many suggestions. I don't know where to go. I can't deal with the pressure. I want to make the right decision. I said, interesting that's in your ear. Because a lot of times the body part matches what the person is having a hard time with. So the body says, I don't want you to stress out anymore. Now you're going to stress out that you have an ear problem. So you can outwit your brain and say to the brain, you don't need that as a mask. And as a Jewish practitioner and a religious practitioner, we talk about bitachon and emunah, and whatever decision you make, it's all going to be good. Hashem is there helping you. And I help the person decrease its anxiety from the real stressor, and we did a body talk and unmasked the real reason. And so all of a sudden, one session, not even, let's say, 20 minutes, and the ear was already better. Sometimes, from the work with Dr. Sarno, there are trapped emotions. There's physical sparks in the brain that get trapped from the trauma. Sometimes it's a circuit that's frazzled from the trauma. And so in one case came my way, and it was a baby that had trauma at birth, and it wasn't growing. The couple came to me, and in this case, because it was a trauma, and it's a baby, so there's practitioners, I'm not an expert on this, but we were friends, and they were willing to, sign a waiver that I'm not responsible, I'm just kidding. And we worked with the baby. You can put magnets on the head from this part of the brain back to the meridian to remove from the brain the trauma. And so this is not placebo. I have done it on dogs. I have done it on babies, and removing these sparks of trauma from the brain through either magnets or laser, there's different ways to do it. And Dr. Sarman talks about it. You could take a refrigerator magnet and use it and help the trauma be removed from the magneticism, or from salts. Salts also can draw, that thing. So the next thing I want to talk about is critical, even just as much of preventing mushy mind. Because if you have a mushy mind, you'll be emotional like a baby. So if someone has depression, or if they have anxiety, one of the signs is that they could be having a mushy mind. And they need to step up to the plate and go to that brain gym and do those visualizations and master the power of the mind. But sometimes it's diet. How many people came my way, and one of the first things I tackle is first the brain, and the second is the diet. This woman was taking meds to go to sleep. She was taking meds to get up, and she was taking meds to get less anxious, I think, from the meds she was taking. And people were thinking it was postpartum depression because she just had a baby. So I investigated. Well, what do you eat? So she says to me, well, for lunch I have yogurt. And I said, I assume the yogurt was sugar, right? Yeah. I don't like yogurt without that. I said, okay, what are you having for dinner? Well, I have sometimes watermelon, and then she was saying all these different things, and she was really not feeding her brain properly. After having a baby, and also nursing, she just wasn't eating enough good foods, and the foods that she was choosing was full of sugar. Oh, I forgot to tell you, she was eating Cocoa Krispies for breakfast. And there are people who are glucose intolerant. So they are even more susceptible for the sugar, because most other food goes different parts of the body until it gets all cleansed and purified and ready for the brain. Sugar crosses the blood-brain barrier right away. And we're talking chemicals. We're talking like okay, some research says it's like cocaine to the brain. It's an onslaught of too much of this garbage that ends up giving the brain fog, or the inability to sleep because it's like a stimulant. So here she was taking meds to go to sleep because she was taking a stimulant for dinner time. So sometimes people are eating the wrong combinations of food, or they're eating too little, or they're eating too much, and they have brain fog. And it's interesting, in Hasidus it does teach us that all mental and emotional disorders comes from the way you eat. Look it up. It's in Kuntres HaAvodah. The Rebbe Rashab says that. And if you look at all the stories in the Torah, it says that Esau, he ate, and he left the world to come because of those beans and the way he ate it. Give it to me. And Yerushin and the rebellious son, he ate and he drank and he became rebellious. Because food is the beginning of all emotional character traits. The way we eat. So imagine someone is suffering anxiety, well maybe they're having too much caffeine. Because some people are more sensitive. And some people...
Can that be connected to what it says about that one of the reasons that we don't eat non-kosher animals is because they have bad character traits?
Absolutely, yes. The Torah teaches us that the reason why we don't eat these very violent animals is because we're absorbing their character traits. Also, the reason why we shecht it in such a gentle way is because if it's going to be suffering while dying, then we're ingesting that suffering that's in that actual physical meat or whatever it is that we're doing. Yes?
You really believe that all mental illness is caused by what we eat?
The Rebbe Rashab says that the beginning source of all character flaws, character traits, so what is anxiety? Is fear, right? It's an extreme character trait of having fear. Depression.
That's a medical
How many
problem.
people came my way and just changing their diet, they stopped becoming depressed? Let me explain from a Torah perspective what's happening. When we eat and it's not l'shem shemaim, and then we indulge, we're giving power over to our animal soul. We just fed the animalistic side of us. So if someone is born with a lot of fire, because we all have these character traits, all of us have fire, water, air, and earth. So if someone is born with a lot of fire and they're eating not properly, then their fire of anger grows. Or fire of anxiety, because fire is also gvura, which gvura is fear. So it's like increasing the fear factor in us when we just gave power over to our animal soul. So someone who was born with more earthy elements, then they're more prone toward depression. They're heavy, they're slow, the world is overbearing, they're lazy. A person who is born with more water elements, this comes from Rambam also, by the way, not just Tanya. The Alter Rebbe brings this from the Rambam. And if a person is born with more water element, then they're born with a more pleasure-seeking personality. So they're going to be the addict. They're going to love shopping, or they're going to love eating, or they're going to love money, or they're going to love all kinds of things. So, and a person who has born with a lot of air, they're the type of person that has a hard time controlling their mouth, what I call diarrhea of the mouth. They just cannot, that's one of the hardest clients for me to work with. They do not let me say a word. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to do, so then that type of person might have to be on some kind of other modality, because they're not going to be there to really listen, you know, whether it's craniosacral or whether it's NAET or all these other kind of therapies that will help the physical body relax, because they can't relax on their own. They're just, anyway, so we have these four elements. Some people are born with all four very dominant. So they talk too much, they sleep too much, they're depressed too much, they're angry, and they overeat. And I saw it as a mother when I was in my stomach. I noticed the difference of each baby. And when they were born, I noticed how they were diaper changing, so different. I'm the same mother, but this one had more of this, and that one had none of that. And so the more you feed your animalistic base tendencies, it goes stronger. So if you want to refine anger, sadness, depression, the first thing you have to do, Chassidus teaches us, look at how you're eating. Is it l'shem shemaim? Is it too indulgent? Are you giving power to the other side of you? If you have two plants, one plant is a poisonous plant, and the other plant is a life-bearing plant. When you choose wrong foods that are not going to be good for you, especially the people who are more sensitive and can't sleep and then can't wake up and have headaches and they're just all over the place because they chose too much sugary foods or empty, dead food, as it were, then you just gave power to your animal soul's fire, and that you just increased your anger. When you refine the way you eat, then it will refine the way you think. This is the Rebbe Rashab's words, not mine. Look it up. Then your thought processes will be refined, and then your emotions will be refined. So food is a big key factor in getting people well from emotional instability. And it is connected. I was the first guinea cow on all this. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing here, because I could not sleep very well. I had so many racy thoughts all the time that just wouldn't allow me to sleep, plus I wasn't eating right, and the more that, it just became worse and worse and worse. And then the day was a blessed day when Chassidus changed my life, and then changed my whole practice. Because I noticed that so many people were not getting fully help by just the traditional. So some people have wheat intolerance, and there's a doctor, Dr. Pulmrudder, and he writes how people are having OCD and panic attacks and anxieties, and as soon as they get off of wheat, and I know friends of mine 30 years ago told me this, that they just changed their diet a little bit and they did not have these kinds of problems anymore. There was a person with who was in and out of psych wards and just got rid of sugar off of his list, and because some people are so sensitive to sugar, it literally can cause psychosis. Now the most important part, we're not going to cover all of this, but the spiritual factor. And this is a big one. We really need to get God back into therapy. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzada says, only teachings that are based on the Torah have the power to cure human problems. This is in the path of the just. The Rebbe Rashab says, in Kuntras Umayan, all mental and emotional disorders comes from an abundance of light, and I'll explain, and a paucity of a vessel. Meaning they're very high souls. And God has blessed them with such a high faculty of imagination that they're the ones that are more prone toward psychosis and all these kinds of mental disorders because they have such high imagination. And again, as we just said, neuroscience teaches us that if we don't channel it, if we don't start working on our mind starts working on us. That's the natural tendency of a brain. So what is this high light? There's so much fire that God's giving a person, just like Yitzchak Avinu had a lot of gvura. He was gifted with so much capabilities of having Yirat Hashem. You would think his father was so chesedic that he would be like his father. But Abraham was born with a lot of water, which is the quality of chesed. He was born with a lot of light. He was a very holy soul. So if we're born with a lot of fire, that's the person that's going to have panic attacks. That's the person that has anger management problems, because he's so much of this holy character trait. But he has to learn how to channel it. See, because if you have, let's say, a crystal glass in front of Niagara Falls, and you put it under Niagara Falls, what's going to happen? You're not going to contain any water in that vessel, and it's going to shatter. So when we have so much of these holy emotions that God is sending our way because we're gifted extra than the average person, then if not channeled properly, then it can shatter the mind, and then it ends up shattering our emotions. So what is the way to channel these fire, water, air, and earth that we all have to do every day? Is pray. When we pray, we are using our fire, we're using our awe of Hashem and our wonderment of God, because fear can sound like fear of God. No. We're beginning to experience more awe and wonderment while we're praying. We're using our water element because we're beginning to try to take pleasure in spiritual practice. We're trying to use our air for a good thing. So the Yetzer Hara won't use our air in a bad way. And so the Yetzer Hara won't take our elements and use it in a bad way. So then there's the earth. So earthy is slow, meditative davening, not blah, 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 blah. So what happens when we pray from a spiritual perspective? The Gemara teaches us this, that our soul comes back into our body through our nose when we wake up in the morning. But it just stays there until the body is cleansed from the fiery words of davening. And when the body is cleansed, right, we cleanse our hands in the morning from the tumah. Well, inside there's a bit of tumah from us, from our soul having left us at the nighttime. So we need to recalibrate. We need to get the body ready for our soul to come up. Look it up in the Gemara. The nose is the area where the soul stays, but for the words of davening. And here comes the big thing. Women always say, but I have no time. I have to cook, I have to this, I have to take the kids, I have to that. Depending how desperately you are to change your anger, your sadness, your anxiety, will depend how much you need to reconsider your schedule for the day so that you will be the best mom that you could be for those children. And if it means waking up 5 or 10 minutes earlier, okay, no, don't sue me. I really have the best lawyer here because women like to say, what are you talking about? Like, I can't. Trust me, I'm a woman, I know how it was, nursing at night and not enough sleep and get up 15 minutes earlier. But if I have to run away from my darker side, you darn well know I'm going to wake up 15 minutes earlier. And people notice the difference. They go, you're right, I'm calmer with the children, I'm much more pleasant with my husband, I'm not so anxious, I'm not depressed. And I'm talking severe psychiatric problems as well, not the run-of-the-mill of out-of-whack type of person who is not functioning at its optimal level. Because why? If the soul is in your nose, animal soul is the king over your body, and it will take your fire and make you fearful. It will take your water and make you addictive. It will hijack you and use what are your goalie, godly, kedusha parts of you and use it in a negative way. So, I give an example. You start your day, and it's tough to start your day. And men do it too. They go to shul, and a lot of them go and out. And I don't. Oh, thank God I'm not a man. And I'm not judging you, because to go to work and have to come up with the bills at the end in this day and age, oh my gosh. I really now say thank God I'm a woman. But so imagine you go to an architect and you ask him, please build me a 20 billion, building. But I want to save money. Can you just make the foundation with Play-Doh? Are you mine? What the? You're really, no. You're starting your day. You're building your whole day. You don't want to start without a good foundation. With your fire, your water, your air, and your earth being used in a holy way, so that the Yetzer Hara won't take it and then use it against you. So most people don't even realize that the time of davening is moichin de galus. And what is that? The expansiveness of the mind. Neuroscience is teaching us that we can expand our minds. We knew that many years ago. How many years ago with the Torah? The time of davening is when our chokhmah, bina, and das, our three intellectual faculties, are uniting with God's chokhmah, bina, and das. So what does that mean? Go to a gas station, fill up your tank. You can only fill up your tank as big as the gas tank is. But with us, God's infinite. His wisdom is infinite. So every day I have a chance to fill up my mind with godly strength of His intellectual gift to me. And again, if you study Chassidus, it teaches us that Chokhmah, Bin, and Das give birth to healthy emotions. So instead of trying to drag your dog and pull it with you and fight your animal tendencies and it's such a struggle. This is just a birthing organically. You can have healthy emotions come out, so you don't have to battle the anger and battle the addictions and battle the. You can't fight the darkness with a stick, right? There's a teaching like that. So we just have to turn on the light, and davening is the time where that's happening. So, let me tell you a case study. There was a girl who was catatonic. Young lady had a baby, and she could not get out of bed. She could not even feed herself. Her mom had to feed her. So we got to the bottom of it. After she had a baby, she didn't have more time. She didn't have time for her spiritual practices. No learning, no davening. I said, interesting. Let's see. This is a red flag. She was also not having the best of diet, but this was number one. This is the first place. I promise you today, she used to do physiotherapy, this therapy, that therapy. She did everything under the sun. And she started davening. She started learning a little bit. And she actually is now out of the house. She was 8 or 9 years in bed, not being able to feed herself. So she had a very high soul. She had a lot of gvura, and the fear, the more we talked about it, is that because when she had a baby, she feared that she wouldn't be able to take care of her baby. It's a number one fear for women because it's so overwhelming. And her husband had left her, so it was even more. And I just slowly started to convince her to pray that she had nothing to lose, to get the fear factor off her back and to channel this fear in a good way. And to this day, she sends me pictures that she went here and she's out of the house there. And I worked with many catatonics. That I had one case where the woman was like, what are you going to do to help? Because I was a Rebbitzin teaching Tanya, and I heard her, she started crying to me just because she wanted to know. And I said, look, I can help. No, what are you? The best 800 an hour doctor couldn't help. And this and that and that. I said, let's just try. Let's go. So first I actually used visualization to see her doing things that she wasn't doing. And all of a sudden her mom called me and she said, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just using visualization. I'm just seeing her do the things. And one thing after the next, then she started actually interacting with me. And then I started teaching her, and she ended up enrolling in college. Not that I'm still for that or whatever, but she actually ended up, she was not from family. And she started getting out of it by doing these things. But in the beginning, sometimes you can help a person. There's a teaching in Tanya that says, Le'Yakov asher pradas Avraham. That we have let me say, Yaakov, remember the whole story? Abraham was in jail, not in jail, he was, warring with kings, and Hashem says, you know what? Yaakov is your grandson. In his merit, I'm going to save you today. Wow, because Yaakov is so amazing. Look at your dynasty. You have so many credits. I'll give it to you now. But the deep teaching of the Torah is that Yaakov represents Tiferes, which is compassion. Compassion has the power to redeem the Avraham in someone else that's buried. We have the power to redeem other people. Like I said, there was a case study with rats. One group of rats were told by the practitioners that you're going to train them to do this maze. And they're genius rats. And then they told the other practitioners, these are retarded rats. They were the same rats. Guess who succeeded like genius rats? Because the practitioners thought they were genius, they got the results. Our thoughts have an impact on the other. So whatever the case, whether it's our clients, whether it's our children, whether it's our husbands, whether it's ourselves, when we think positively about them, when we have compassion for their struggle instead of taking it personally, we have the power to redeem the goodness in the other. So there was actually a research done that when they would put a band on one hand and switch it to the other hand, they had two groups. One group was told, think of things you were grateful for, just in the matter of the time that you switched the band. The other group were told nothing. They researched 30 or 40 days. The group that had gratitude, for those few seconds, their cortisol level went down and all their happy chemicals went up. The other group, no difference. Modani, what are we doing every day? We're saying thank you Hashem, we're spending moments. So if we're blah, 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 it's better than nothing. But imagine we stay a few mindful moments, one real deep meditation of how thankful you are. Actually see yourself jumping up and down with such gratitude, as if you're dancing the night away. You're creating happy chemicals in a very short 12-second fix. So we can be our own CBTT practitioners and help ourselves. And hopefully those of you who are out in the field there can start looking at the whole piece of the puzzle. Whether it's the brain that's mushy, whether it's the diet, whether it's the sleep, whether we mentioned a bunch of other things in this list. Whoever wants it, email me, Miriam Yerushalmi 18@gmail.com, and I will send it to you. So So we're going to talk about this week's parsha actually, because we're now Motzei Shabbat, and it's something that's very fascinating. That is actually what we've been talking about. You know the Indian where Parshas Bo, where it talks about the firstborn son of the Mitzrayim that were, the Makat Becharot, and then there were the firstborn Jewish son that was redeemed. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says it's a lesson for us today. Our first intellect is not holy. And we need to slaughter it. We need to get rid of it. We need to redeem the godly intellect. Because if not, the other one takes over, as we said earlier. If you had hoodlums in your door, would you let them in? But a mushy mind doesn't have the power to say, no, thank you, that's not a good thought. And that's just going to make me more sad and more anxious. A stronger brain has the power to say, no, thank you, I'm not going to accept your hoodlum thought. And the Rebbe goes on and teaches us that it's not enough just to redeem your intellect, your godly intellect. You need the brain and the knowledge that you're acquiring from Hashem to reach your heart, so that you will have a knowing heart. Have you ever seen doctors? I have, and my relatives have, that they just did surgery. One of my relatives actually ended up unfortunately dying from smoking and lung. And I can't even believe it to this day. After the surgery, after the doctor showed the lungs and how black it was, both the doctor and he was smoking. So you can know a lot. You can see a lot. And yet, it doesn't affect you, because if you don't have that knowledge streaming into your heart, then it doesn't impact your behaviors. In the book Sugar Blues, he sees all these people in the hospitals with diabetes, and they keep eating the sugar, and they have to amputate another leg and another. Or people who have all kinds of diseases and they keep eating the sugary foods, even though the doctors are the fatty foods, and they can't. They'll know it. They'll experience the fear of their life, but they have no power. Because knowledge is not power unless it reaches your heart. So the Rebbe actually teaches us the knowledge. It's very hard to just instantly just get to your heart. That's why, there's this big brain and there's this Meitzarim from Mitzrayim. A very narrow straight to get the knowledge to your heart, unless you spend time meditating. Okay, it doesn't have to be but it's deep contemplative davening, deep contemplative learning, and this has an impact on our brain. Dr. Sarah Lazar is showing us that this has the power to bring the knowledge to come and have more interconnection with the heart. Science is showing us this. I mean, look at the Torah. It says, don't go after your heart's desires. Even the commandment when they were going to war, Hashem commanded them. Don't be faint-hearted. Hello? You're going to war. You don't know if you're going to come back alive, and God's commanding you not to be fearful. So all these commandments is showing us that it's not impossible, even under the enormous stress of war, that we can be capable of moach sholet al halev. We just have to believe if a dog can do it, we can. And we have the Torah as our guide. We have the roadmap of even the newest science that's proving what's already the roadmap of our Torah. So there's so much more to say, but I just want to leave with this. Don't believe everything you say, everything you hear. Don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything you hear. You go to some doctor, you'll go to some psychologist, you'll go to some this, and they'll tell you this. You know how many times I went to different this and that, and so many opposite. Even when I was trying to have children for 8 years, this doctor said I could never have. This one said it was his fault. This one said it was my fault. So And when I had severe digestive issues, I went to this doctor, and this one said that, and this one said have a surgery, and this said no surgery. Emun and bitachon, that Hashem has provided us so much to self-care. Be your own CBTT practitioner. Look at the Torah and see that, diet is related to emotion. So if I'm an angry monster, let me see how I'm eating. Or maybe it's because I have such holy energies and I'm not creating some kind of keli to contain it. Davening creates this keli. Now my body is pure. Now my soul can reside. Now my soul can use fire, water, air, and earth in a good way. And the second ingredient that is just as important as the davening, which I mentioned here, is learning Torah right after davening. And I'll explain why. First of all, davening is amazing, right? We just learned. It's a time of liking the gods. And it's the only way to rectify animalistic tendency, by the way. The Rebbe Rishab, the only way to really change, you need to daven. And daven in a good way. That's why, not to plug this book, but why not? But the only way, so if you're trying all these other therapies and you're not getting the maximum results that you want, and you're just the edge off a little bit, then that's the key way. But learning after davening is also critical. This happened to me. I was actually with my mom in Israel. She was in the hospital, and I was with her for 2.5 months. I did not give up my keli. Not learning, not davening. I would learn, I would get up early, even though she woke up at 6, I woke up early to daven, and I said, okay, I'm just going to learn later when she takes a nap, because she was waiting for me, she needed my care. I started regressing, I started noticing just I'm not myself anymore. And yes, it was traumatic. I don't wish anyone to see a loved one suffer like I saw. And so many people are suffering. And so what happened was, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm davening, I'm learning. Okay, I'm not eating as much, and yes, it's stressful. But I opened the Igros and it said, don't let the honor of your mother fool you. And get back to learning. And I'm like, learning? I'm learning. Okay, so I'm like, then, around the same time, there was a Torah teaching that it's critical to learn right after davening. And I'm like, this is not, oh my gosh, Hashem, I love you. I'm reading, I'm like, because when you daven, you arouse holy emotions. This is what's happening in davening. Love of Hashem, and this of Hashem, of Hashem, all of your positive qualities and these emotional traits are on fire after davening. But if you're not going to cool down that fire with the godly intellect through learning Torah, then what happens is you're all fragmented, you're all over the place. You haven't cooled down that emotional energy. And in fact, and this is not out of nowhere, the Alter Rebbe said that you can actually increase your negativity and literally empower the other side of you and give it more power. So I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn with my mom. Instead of her waiting for me, I did the time of the day, 3 pages, not even, and I would explain it to her, and I became back to myself. And I did not sleep so well, and I did not eat so well, and it was very stressed. She would, how many times a night in suffering, agony, and all that, but I didn't lose it compared to when I learned later in the day. So I bless you all to look at these factors. If any one of your loved ones, or if you are a practitioner, check out the whole thing and really look into the details of maybe one factor that the therapist is not looking into, especially the spiritual factor, because that's like the key to our well-being. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And I know it's late, but those of you who have to go, we can be in touch through email. I have YouTube, Facebook, Torah Anytime, books on Amazon. Whoever came a little later and did not get this pamphlet, most of what we talked about is here, so you'll remember it. And other classes of mine do have 1 or 2 classes on this, and 5 or 10 classes on prayer, so you can have fun. with increasing your knowledge of how to be your own CBTT practitioner. Thank you. I need pioneers here. I need to like beg all of you to revolutionize your way of thinking about these things and help the people you know, and maybe even yourself, from the future things that are happening in today's day. So if any questions, I'm more than thank you for coming all the way today. Don't talk about me. I said I didn't want you to talk about me.
So when we're gonna have your first shots? We got the honor.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Because I grew up with this idea that you could change your thoughts, make good, be good.
Spinning your wheels, spinning your wheels.
Which way does it work?
It's all fun. It's all
I'm all for medication.
Right.
If you want CT,
That's human nature. It's easy to find it.
If you write down your name and number, I can inform you of other events. I'm gonna also, I forgot to announce, I wanna start, doing programs with, help people, like this, yes.
Never took it. I've seen people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so let me take down, there was a video going now you can give me your number and right now I will. I'm just gonna turn off the recording 1 second. Thank you for joining and be your own CBTT practitioner. And if you want, again, my email, Miriam Yerushalmi 18@gmail.com. I will send you the brochure that I put out so that you will have it. And all this is actually in my upcoming new book, Health and Happiness, by the way. All this information. So I put it down in a little like 6-page thing. So can't wait to share with you. All right, bye-bye. And if you have any questions, please PM me.